There is a country in the middle of Italy, with less than half a square kilometre, smaller than a neighbourhood, smaller than a shopping mall. And even so, this place has its own army, its own bank, its own secrets, and influences the lives of 1.3 billion people on the planet. I am talking about the Vatican, and what you are about to discover in the next few minutes, they probably never told you. A lot of people repeat that the Vatican is just a dot on the map, but that phrase hides the most unsettling detail. With only 0.44 kilometers, it is smaller than many neighborhoods in São Paulo, and even so, it operates as a symbolic, political, and spiritual center for millions of people on the planet. It is almost a geographic paradox. The smaller the territory, the larger the shadow it casts, and that changes the way you see the place, because what looks tiny on the outside starts to function like something gigantic on the inside. And the next layer makes that even more obvious. The official figure speaks of around 800 people connected to the Vatican, but only about 450 actually live within the walls, which already breaks the idea of a normal country. It is not a state built to have normal urban life, a neighborhood, noisy civil routine, or spontaneous population growth. It is almost a highly selective human mechanism, where presence and function matter more than numbers. And when a country works with so few people, each person seems to occupy a much more strategic role than anywhere else, which becomes even more curious when you realize that even the most basic codes of sovereignty are there. This is where the Vatican stops looking like just a religious enclave and starts asserting itself as a miniature state. It has had its own telephone code, uses the VA internet domain, and even maintains its own radio station, as if reminding the world, through almost bureaucratic details, that its sovereignty is not symbolic, it is concrete. These signs seem small, but they function like stamps of international existence. And the more you notice these discrete
Welcome
codes
aboard,
of
sir.
autonomy,
Right this way.
the stranger
Thank
it
you.
becomes to
Your
realize
luggage is being
that
loaded.
such a recognized country can, at the same time, hide almost everything about its own economic functioning. In almost every country in the world, you can open a table and find GDP, per capita income, production, growth. In the Vatican, this modern impulse to measure everything hits a wall. GDP per capita there is considered incalculable because the state does not publish official economic data like a common nation, which feeds an aura of opacity that fits the place perfectly. It is not just a lack of transparency in the banal sense, but a system that seems to exist outside the metrics we use to understand power. And that becomes even more curious when even military force follows its own logic, almost frozen in time. The Pontifical Swiss Guard was founded in 1506 and carries a title that seems to come from another century. It is the oldest military body in continuous service in the world. But the most interesting thing is not the age itself, but what it reveals about the Vatican. Their tradition is not historical decoration, it is a living structure of power. While other states modernized their symbols until they almost erased them, the Vatican preserved its own as part of its real functioning. And when an institution more than 5 centuries old still protects the center of the country, the next question arises almost on its own. How many people actually do that? The number is impressive less because of its size than because of the contrast. Only 135 soldiers protect the Pope and the entire territory, which would be unthinkable in almost any other sovereign state. But the Vatican does not depend on the classic military logic of extensive borders, diffuse threats and massive presence. It operates with symbolic precision, protocol, and access control. It is a protection that seems far too small, until you remember that almost everything there was designed to concentrate power in a small space. And precisely because it is such a small group, the process to join this guard is much more restrictive than the ceremonial image suggests. Joining the Swiss Guard is not simply about getting a military position, it means passing through a filter that seems designed to keep intact a specific idea of loyalty, discipline, and tradition. To apply, the man must be Swiss, Catholic, unmarried, and under 30 years old, which shows that the Vatican does not choose only soldiers, but profiles compatible with an institution that sees itself as historical continuity. It is not ordinary recruitment, it is almost human curation. And that helps explain why even the uniform the whole world recognizes also comes surrounded by myth, appearance, and half-truths. Few things in the Vatican are photographed as much as the striped uniform of the Swiss Guard, and perhaps that is why the legend spreads so well. Many people still repeat that it was created by Michelangelo. But that attribution is wrong. The current design is from the 20th century, which shows how the place knows how to turn aesthetics into continuity, even when the real origin is much less Renaissance than it seems. In the Vatican, appearance is also a tool of authority, and if even such a visible piece of clothing creates historical confusion, imagine what happens with what remained hidden for centuries behind doors, shelves, and institutional silence. At this point, the Vatican leaves behind any appearance of being just a ceremonial country and enters the territory of pure fascination. The Vatican Apostolic Archive gathers about 85 linear kilometers of shelves, and for centuries was known as the Secret Archive. The name helped feed theories, of course, but the most curious thing is that the secrecy there does not come only from mystery, it comes from accumulation. When an institution keeps centuries of decisions, conflicts, letters, and records, it does not store only paper, it stores entire versions of history, and what is kept inside makes that feeling even stronger. Inside this archive are documents that cover around 200 years of history, which by itself would already be enough to change the scale of the conversation. But then specific pieces appear, like Henry VIII's letter asking the Pope to annul his marriage, a request that, once denied, helped trigger a religious rupture with enormous effects. Suddenly, the archive stops seeming like a storage place and becomes a turning point in Western history. And the most intriguing part is that this is nowhere near the only explosive episode preserved there among parchments, trials, and institutional memory. And then the archive rises to another level of historical weight. Among its documents are records linked to the trial of Galileo Galilei and also to the Templars, two subjects that alone already carry centuries of conflict between faith, power, knowledge, and myth. This matters because it reveals something not very intuitive about the Vatican. It does not keep only the triumphs of the Church, but also traces of controversies that helped shape its image in the world. In other words, it preserves even the most delicate chapters of its own authority. And this pattern of silent concentration appears again even in the country's financial system. The Vatican Bank, known as the IOR, seems small when seen by the number of clients, around 15,000 worldwide. But that scale is misleading, because even while serving an extremely restricted group, it moves billions and reinforces a logic that appears all the time in this country. Few people, little space, little exposure, and disproportionate impact. It is not a retail bank, not a common institution, not a structure designed for the masses. It is almost a closed financial circuit inside a state, surrounded by symbolism. And this contrast becomes even more visible when even the money issued there gains value far beyond what it should be worth. The Vatican issues its own euro coins, and that detail seems small until you realize the symbolic and economic effect it produces. In practice, they are rare coins, highly disputed by collectors, and often sold for values far above their face value, as if the country could turn even ordinary metal into an object of prestige. It is almost a silent lesson in scarcity, identity, and institutional aura. And when even the local currency is worth more for what it represents than for what it buys, it becomes easier to understand why the artistic heritage there enters another scale of magnitude. The Vatican concentrates works of art valued in the hundreds of billions of dollars. But the strangest point is not the aesthetic wealth itself. It is the fact that this heritage does not enter the common logic of the market. It is not sold like a portfolio, and not even declared as an asset in the way a conventional institution would do, which reinforces the idea that their value does not necessarily mean liquidity. It is an immense treasure that exists more as cultural power, memory, and authority than as available capital. And when such a small country accumulates this level of heritage, the next surprise almost seems inevitable. Even the concentration of museums escapes logic. Few places on the planet condense so much visual memory into so little space as the Vatican, and that is why it often appears as the territory with the highest density of museums per kilometre in the world. The fact seems almost comical at first glance, but it reveals a central logic of this country. There, every square metre has been turned into symbol, collection, and narrative. It is no exaggeration to say that physical space has been compressed to serve the preservation of cultural power. And when so much history fits into so little ground, it makes sense that a single religious building there can rival much larger arenas. St. Peter's Basilica can accommodate around 60,000 people, a number that exceeds the capacity of many football stadiums and destroys the image that the Vatican is just a cramped group of historic buildings. There, the scale changes suddenly. From the smallest country in the world, you enter one of the largest religious spaces ever built, designed to crush any sense of human smallness before the grandeur of the place. It is not just architecture, it is calculated impact. And when such a tiny territory houses structures of this size, it begins to make sense that even everyday services there also function on another level. Among so many images of domes, guards, and ceremonies, few people imagine that the Vatican also houses its own pharmacy, open to the public, and considered by many one of the best in Rome. That draws attention because it breaks the idea that the country lives only on ritual and symbol. There is also discreet, efficient infrastructure there, highly valued in daily life. In a territory where almost everything seems exceptional, even a basic service gains an almost legendary reputation, and this mix of state, institution, and practical life becomes even more curious when you discover that there is also an internal market with rules very different from those outside. There is a supermarket inside the Vatican, but it does not function as a tourist curiosity open to anyone passing by. Access is restricted to employees and authorized people, and one of the most commented details is that products can be sold without Italian taxes, which turns a simple market into yet another concrete proof of practical sovereignty. Even in everyday shopping, the Vatican operates like a world apart. And when even rice, soap, or chocolate enter this unique logic, it becomes even more fascinating to remember that one of its most famous works also came at a high cost to the body of the man who created it. One of the most repeated images about Michelangelo is that he supposedly painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel lying down, almost like in a movie scene. But that does not match what is known. He worked in an inclined position, with his body forced upward for long periods, and this effort is believed to have caused permanent damage to his vision, in addition to real physical suffering. The detail matters because it dismantles the romantic myth and shows the human cost behind a monumental work. And if even the art there was born from extreme sacrifice, the center of this country also revolves around a figure with unusual power in the modern world. In the middle of democracies, parliaments, constitutions, and heads of state, limited by formal rules, the Pope occupies a position that seems almost anachronistic. He is the only absolute monarch in Europe, with total power over a sovereign state. This does not mean that he governs like a medieval king in a caricatured sense, but that the legal structure of the Vatican concentrates final authority in a single figure in a way that is extremely rare in today's world. It is a spiritual, political, and state office at the same time.
Thank you, that was quick.
And when so much power is gathered in one person, the inevitable question becomes,
and your prescription is updated.
How long does that power last? In theory, the office of Pope is for life, which reinforces even more the idea of absolute continuity within the Vatican. But that logic was broken in 2013, when Benedict XVI resigned, something so rare that it had not happened for around 600 years. The impact of this was enormous, because it showed that even the institution most associated with permanence can, under historical pressure, open an almost unthinkable exception. It was a silent but profound shock, and when even a pope can leave before death, the ritual for choosing the next one gains almost dramatic weight. The choice of a new pope happens through a ritual that seems designed to resist the 21st century. In the conclave, the cardinals remain in total isolation, without internet, without telephone, and without free contact with the outside world. In a time when everything leaks, everything is commented on, and everything accelerates, The Vatican responds with closed doors, silence, and suspended time. This is not just theatrical tradition. It is a way of shielding the country's most important decision from immediate pressure. And when the result finally appears, it does not come through a speech, interview, or post. It comes through a much older and more symbolic sign. The famous white smoke that announces the election of a new pope seems like a simple gesture from the outside, but it is a carefully controlled symbol. It comes from the burning of the voting ballots mixed with specific chemical substances, precisely so that the color leaves no doubt about the result. It is curious to realize how, in the Vatican, even a smoke signal needs to be managed with institutional precision. Nothing there depends only on improvisation or interpretation. And if even the communication of the choice is surrounded by absolute protocol, it makes sense that the figure of the Pope himself carries very particular marks of sovereignty. The Pope does not move around the world only as a religious leader. He also moves as a head of state, and that appears even in the documents he carries. For that reason, he has a Vatican passport and another special diplomatic travel passport, something that perfectly summarizes the dual, or even triple, nature of the office: spiritual, political, and international. It is more proof that in the Vatican, symbol and bureaucracy walk together all the time. Even the mobility of the highest leader becomes an extension of sovereignty. And when such a singular office accumulates this kind of layer, it is no surprise that the final point dives exactly where the Vatican fascinates most: the territory of the unrevealed. And perhaps no detail better summarizes the Vatican's relationship with power and mystery than this persistent legend about a supposed secret of the throne, a document that each pope would read upon taking office, without ever revealing its content. There is no reliable confirmation that this exists, and it is important to say that clearly. But the simple fact that the story survives already says a lot about the image of the place. The Vatican is a machine of authority surrounded by enough silence to feed lasting myths. And when even what cannot be proven seems plausible there, it becomes clear that this country is small only on the map. In the end, the Vatican seems to prove something that goes far beyond it. Physical size and real size are almost never the same thing. There are places that occupy little space on the map, but concentrate centuries of influence, symbols, archives, rituals, and human power at a level that challenges common logic. And maybe that is why so many people look at the Vatican and see only church art or tourism, without realizing that there is a rare laboratory of how authority, narrative, and tradition can shape the way the world thinks. Traveling deep down is also this: learning to see what is hidden on the surface. So, if this video made you look at the Vatican in a different way, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments which of these facts changed your view the most.